and then about the internet and the far right, and then we kind of the riot at the Capitol happened maybe 2 weeks after, and we're now having to write a postscript for the just to bring everything into focus more. It's just
it's okay though, because today we have managed to define fascism. Finally, after
you did,
yeah.
What is it?
Oh, it's a trade secret, I'm afraid.
Damn it. Okay, yeah. I got to buy the book now.
Yeah.
I think the book's going to be free now.
Yeah, the book would be free. The book would be free.
Okay.
It's all Creative Commons. But yeah, it's like the Coke recipe or something. So each of us only has half of it. I know that it's something to do with a mass associational form. And I think Alex knows something about a bourgeois state, but we haven't yet. No one actually wants to put the two things together. That's a kind of an inside joke from our previous podcast. So if you didn't understand what I was saying, go back and listen to David Renton about a week and a half ago. We are really, really happy to be here with Joshua Citarella, who is a writer, researcher, Twitch streamer, Discord social group admin, and kind of teenage radical kind of whisperer. Who has been doing a lot of really interesting work for the last, I think, 4 years now, on a space that used to be called Politigram, and is now, I think, kind of moved away from maybe that term, but has potentially kind of online youth cultures, particularly focused on the combinations and recombinations of different political ideologies as they are used as, maybe this is maybe kind of a bad summary, maybe you can correct me, as political ideology becomes a kind of token that people use to exchange amongst themselves, right, as a kind of marker of an identity that is an identity of being radical, but not of having any particular beliefs in that radicalism. Maybe that's a totally opaque definition. Maybe that you don't think that's true at all, but yeah.
Well, I think they're questions of branding. I mean, essentially, that is the infrastructure. That's how social media is designed, right? And now we have this problem of differentiating what is a genre, what is a subculture, versus what is a political movement, and the lines between that are increasingly blurry, which makes it very interesting. But also the rate of meaningful interactions, basically doing this research, you're chucking out 95% of what you encounter as being nonsense, but the remaining 5% is really, really important. So I think of the various channels, the Twitch stream, the podcast, the books, the articles, as just chugging tons and tons of primary research and trying to distill, what is that really important 5%? Sometimes it's really clear. Sometimes it takes a while to bear fruit, and you go back and you're like, oh yeah, it was really that thing from 2019. That's what it was. And I self-published the second edition of this book project, this group of interviews. The title of the book is 20 Interviews. That was a commission from Rhizome. And I was looking back at it in advance of listing it to print on demand in order. And I realized there's tons of things in there that were oh, this just evaporated. It never became a meme. It never entered into the discourse. And then there were other things that oh shit, we could have detected it much earlier. You can find Boogaloo memes in there 6 to 8 months before they were in every major city in the US, right? So it's things like that, of having your ear close to the ground, doing the early detection. And I like meme whisperer. That's good. I was thinking maybe more social media political trend casting or something like that, but let's go with meme whisperer.
I'm glad that I've given you a kind of new job title as well. How do you know? What do you have? How do you know that something is going to blow up? How do you know that something is not going to blow up? What do you have just a feeling for it, or are there some heuristics that we can apply when we're looking at these cultures?
Yeah, well, I guess the issue is that if you're doing the quantitative analysis, these things are way too small to be visible through any type of a data eye, right? If you're doing the bird's eye view, you're looking at something that is quantitatively insignificant that then experiences a viral spike. So there's not a way to just scrape a bunch of data and analyze it and then do your predictions off of that. So it really does have to be a qualitative analysis. That being said, there's some numbers that you can use to parse this stuff, but I think it's really just about looking at the actual thing, looking at the young people, looking at their accounts, looking at their media diet, and trying to create some kind of coherent narrative that runs through the whole thing.
There's a certain degree of social resonance that a meme has to have in order to be picked up and used by lots of other people. Has to kind of mean something in the discursive space of online play or online talking or online discussion, online meme making, right? It has to kind of mean something in that sense. And I'm kind of wondering if, like, maybe the reason why it's so difficult to detect what will blow up and what won't blow up is because we don't have, a general theory of posting. Like, we need a general theory of posting. Why do people post? What are they doing when they're posting? And particularly, does this change with age? Does it change with like demographics? Could be like obviously one variable, but does it change? Obviously, changes with different platforms and so on. But I feel like I don't know why people post on the internet at all, or I understand it for myself. I know I do it, but I don't know what the kind of general model is for why people are actually participating. So what is the general motivation for participation, I guess, is the question, really. Like, do you think there's a particular one?
Well, it's curious now, because I mean, for me, it's really clear in that, like, I earn my living through the visibility that I get on social media. So there's a very clear incentive for me to post. I imagine that for you guys, it's something similar, that you're producing content, you're trying to get clicks, trying to get views. We're all in this content rat race. But there is a totally different way of engaging where I see people who are otherwise wealthy, successful, experience, have a very charmed quality of life, and then go about these weird, affected, totally artificial, like, influencer type photo shoots of themselves that to an audience of like seemingly like 50 people. It's very perplexing. So I feel like there's a whole spectrum of different motivations for people, and for some people it's just earning a living. For other people it's really not. But to your first point that you had mentioned, I feel like if a meme doesn't resonate with an audience, it doesn't get passed along, right? So conceivably, you could have monkeys bashing away at a typewriter and generate every text and image combination. And people have literally done this with JavaScripts, where they just add A/B combinations. And is this funny? Is this funny? And that those things don't often produce meaningful results. So if the meme doesn't resonate with you on some level, it doesn't get passed along. And I think that this has to be framed in contrast to an increasingly deep crisis in the media narrative, fake news, bias, whatever you have, that it's really clear that you just can't trust the things that are published. And memes seem to have some type of an internal truth, like there's an internal compass to them, that it resonates with you on some deep level. Maybe it's esoteric or mystical, or it's like a sense of conspiratorial elites that are putting microchips in your food, or I guess not the food they put in your body, but they're putting soy in the food, and
they put microchips wherever they can. There are microchips
everywhere. there's chips all over the place. Exactly. Yeah. And so I think basically what we're watching is like a crisis that starts at the top of these old legacy rotten media institutions that are really struggling to produce ideology at the moment, and people are moving or they're just gravitating towards these memes that seem to have some kind of a truth in it, although that truth is really fuzzy and maybe in most cases a worse source of information, in some cases a much better source of information. It's that like 95-5 ratio again.
There seems to be, like, I suppose, different currents to memes as well. Like, the things that most people see are like the ones that take over the internet and break out massively and kind of explode and then kind of die back again. But there's always like kind of little explosions of memes, I suppose, that are kind of in one particular platform or one particular community. I got briefly obsessed with this kind of red meat posting section of Facebook, where they kind of, eat raw meat and talk about lifting and, very into Nazism. And I just tumbled into this thing when someone kind of posted a link to me. Think you might be interested in this. You study this stuff. And there's just this language, this kind of visual language, and that's going on. Was completely and utterly alien to me. And I kind of like, for a little bit, I kind of started eating tiny pieces of raw meat just to see what the big deal was and stuff. And it's just like, my point is, there's a bunch of memes going on that we never see, or at least if you're not looking for them, you never see. And I find that kind of the most difficult to wrap my head around with this whole thing.
The meat stuff, the sauerkraut, those guys, they're really interesting because I have to imagine that anti-vaxxers were something very similar to that 5-10 years ago. And now it's super, super mainstream, right? So I think this is, again, kind of this early detection issue where although this is like quantitatively really small, we're not talking about Kylie Jenner, right? We're talking about a few thousand people spread out between a few platforms that are really interested in these recipes of like eating quail eggs and I guess oats. Oats is like their big thing now. I don't fully understand why, but oats, I guess, turn you gay or some shit like this. And almond, is it almond milk too? I don't. They have a few things that are like their hobby horses. But yeah, you're supposed to eat sauerkraut, raw meat, eggs, and I think you're also supposed to use eggs as shampoo as well. And I think you're supposed to put them in your eyes too. And I don't fully know some of these things, I'm sure like there are some health benefits. I think you can also die from drinking raw milk too. I think you can literally die from it.
There's a great Twitter thing recently I saw where one guy was setting out to eat raw meat exclusively in his diet and had to like kind of do this big Twitter thread about why he had to stop because his body was literally shutting down from all the, I suppose, worms and weird shit that was going on in there. It was fucking horrible.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because it's like it's that kind of thing where they're actually leaning towards like a little bit of truth. Like there's terrible adverse effects from industrialized production and factory farming and processed foods and all this type of stuff. But maybe that's a good hamster wheel to keep people on. Just keep them on the meat and the cabbage stuff, and don't get them involved in the distribution of scarce resources. And like, let us plan the trains. Let them handle the meat recipes, and that's a good division of labor in society.
No, just the interesting thing about these kind of there is an undercurrent of fascism to all these red meat things a lot of the time, but it's kind of an insular fascism. It's like, I'm going to be off in the forest eating meat and thinking Hitler was good, rather than going out and killing people or whatever. It's a weird kind of like, you can stay in that bubble and just do Hitler stuff and eat red meat. It's cool.
It seems like the esotericism has really accelerated. Like, so in the period after the Second World War, there was a whole bunch of esoteric Nazis, obviously, and it was obvious why they were doing it, right? So there's like Miguel Serrano and so on, who's completely crazy. Go look up Miguel Serrano if you don't know who that is. He's who basically invents various kinds of mysticism and has a theory about why it is that lots of Nazis fled to South America that recapitulates a kind of 10,000-year-old myth that had happened when the original Aryans had also gone to, blah, 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 whatever. Like, these kind of things. And that happens, but that takes, I think, about like 10, 15 years. Whereas it seems like the far right now has simultaneously had this it kind of crashed and burned after Charlottesville, and then again like on an international level after Christchurch, and then I guess another section of the far right has like crashed and burned after Trump. There's still this kind of QAnon remnant, but the switch to esotericism, the switch to kind of private fascism or private far right beliefs, has been extraordinarily quick. And I wonder if that's because politics now simply is metapolitics. By which I mean that there is no site of contestation in society. Society is just not contested. It's not. There is no, despite what the kind of liberals were saying about the Capitol riot, and despite what people they were saying again about Charlottesville in 2017, there was no point at which the state was even remotely threatened by these far right groups, right? And so it seems like all politics is now doomed to just stay in the level of metapolitics, just kind of stay in the level of this kind of metic kind of circulation. And I guess that's a problem for the left as well, right? The left needs to struggle against its own becoming metapolitics.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think if I'm familiar with the story that you're describing, is that, say, for example, there was an island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean that had an ancient advanced civilization, and this island sunk as a result of thermonuclear war. And then the refugees from that island fled to various continents on the borders, the land masses on the border of the Atlantic Ocean. And those need to reunite to spawn the sixth root race to ascend into, I don't know, I guess we become like ghosts or something like that. None of that has any bearing whatsoever on how much medical debt you have. That's the difference. Like, you can get into all of the weird religious cultic type of stuff that you want, but these are actually two totally separate lanes. And our task is, I think, to move away from the, I don't know, like pickling political ideas to hold them for some point in the future. And like, we just actually need some really basic necessities now. And these can be entirely two different categories. We have a lot of people in the Discord who are super into this. It's not even like hobbyism. It's just like, aren't conspiracies like fun? And they like tickle your brain sort of way. And it's like, well, what if the aliens, what if cliffs are actually like giant tree trunks that got chopped down by 100 feet tall? It's like, hey, sure. How about your medical debt? Like, let's continually reframe this. Yeah. So doing the left as metapolitics is like a worse failure. I will say also, I think we do kind of need to frame this as a little bit of a counterterrorism question as well, because the people who went out and tried to enact their far right politics, that stuff got nipped in the bud really quick. Those people are off the platforms. They're like, they don't have bank accounts anymore. So for just a level of self-preservation, those communities are now doing the ritual aspects of it. Like, okay, let's get together and we'll do the talk and essentially like hold church for esoteric belief systems, which is, I mean, I guess that's preferable. Right? It's preferable if people are like, yeah, we're all light workers and we're doing, we're star seeds, and we don't go out and protest and we don't organize and we're not creating lobbying groups or doing hate crimes or shit like that. We just get together and meditate. Like, yeah, that's great. That's much more preferable.
I have this thing about what people have described as eco-fascism. I feel like this is a very vague and I think actually quite like a bad term, on which see forthcoming book. So, but one of the kind of central dimensions of it, the reason why I think it's a bad term, is because I think that exactly what you're describing, that there is a constitutive inability amongst people who are dominated by conspiracy, and it seems like the far right of the political spectrum is increasingly dominated by conspiracy. There is constitutive inability that in that worldview that they have, the question of whether or not there is 416 or 417 or 450 parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is just not even a posable question. And the question of whether or not various kinds of geoengineering systems might like work to mitigate that, or whether or not we need to do kind of taxing of things in order to prevent carbon emissions, or we need to radically shift on kind of path of degrowth. None of these questions even arise. And I think that maybe the principal danger of ecofascism at the moment, as far as I could see it, is not that there will be some sort of mass movement which will demand punitive measures, although that will definitely happen as well. The major danger seems to be that there will be a mass movement that simply manages to use these beliefs of the kind of conspiratorial type to forget that the world exists, to forget that climate change is a problem, to forget that there is even a thing that can be addressed. And this is why I find the aesthetic bootloaders of ecofascism that are in QAnon so worrying. Not because I think they're going to do anything, but because I think they're going to massively distract from the capacity of anyone to do anything at all. I appreciate that there's like, in America, there are much more pressing issues. I don't have any medical debt, and I don't think anyone that I know has any medical debt, at least in the UK, obviously, because we have instituted the things that American socialists are demanding, right? But yes, I think
that shows how fucking far behind the ball we are in the US.
Oh, you're so far behind.
Yeah.
So it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, when even the British are ahead of you in political progressiveness, you are really, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a great example of this. I mean, you brought up so many great points. I'm trying to put my thoughts in order here, but I like to touch base on the furthest end of a political idea or political spectrum to like understand what the thing is and then bring myself back to reality. So I find that is a helpful thing to just calibrate your worldview, to use what is the primary source material for the extreme version of what you're talking about? What is at the bottom of that rabbit hole? And I sometimes listen to this podcast from, what is the guy's name? His name is Poke Runyon, and he does a podcast called The Hermetic Hour. And they have a magical lodge in Silver Lake, Colorado. California. It's somewhere in California. I don't really know the layout too well, but he was describing when they first got the lease to this magical lodge, and it had coincided with. He tells the story something like this. It's very dramatic. It's like, we had just signed the lease, and then we were immediately hit with a biblical flood. And after that, there was a wildfire. And he's telling the story about basically natural disasters unfolding, but somehow through divine providence, through the intervention of some divine force, the lodge was preserved every single time. And they have sculptures of like Greek gods and like, I don't know, like people with bird heads and hieroglyphs and just all sorts of just hocus pocus, crazy shit. But like, it just dawned on me that this guy is actually the best equipped to survive climate change, because he has built into his belief system, like it's already recuperating itself. So actually, the more terrible natural disasters that unfold, the more chosen by a divine creator and divine force he is, right? So it's actually, it's kind of self-fulfilling that way. It's an excellent coping strategy. I hope he's wrong because I'd prefer not to die in a flood or a wildfire. But yeah, I think ecofascism is unfortunately a very slippery term. And I've seen people try to use it to different ends, right? And I think some of them are effective, some of them are not effective. I think we have to frame all of this as, although it existed online before, it massively spikes after Christchurch, right? Like, unless there were 50 people murdered in association with this term, it would not be part of the mainstream vernacular. But immediately after that, it was used by, I think, the NYC DSA in a press release describing a rationing of electricity during a heat wave or something like this. And I thought, this is maybe this is like crying wolf. Maybe that's too extreme of a term to use, given the polarity of those two examples. And that, potentially dilutes the ability of people to respond to it when there is like a real green far right threat that would actually care about environmentalism, right? So that muddying those terms can do us a disservice later on. But if you go back through the history of that term, there's actually quite a bit in it. And I think it's helpful to unravel some of those things, because basically the way that it's used is not really, or the way that it started is not really how it's used now. I think of these kind of pagan, esoteric belief systems, Pentelincola, this kind of a thing, which is very much about like autarky and like basically living off of the land and this kind of thing. And instead, people are using it more to describe eco-austerity. And I think we should just say eco-austerity rather than eco-fascism.
I mean, I think eco-fascism suffers the same problem that the term fascism does. People just this thing's really bad, I'm going to call it fascism. This thing's really bad and also to do with the environment, I'm going to call it eco-fascism. And it's like, this is what we've been struggling with as a podcast as well, trying to get people to not do that quite a lot.
Yeah, I wanted to come back to one use of ecofascism that I'm sure you would support, because it's in an essay that you wrote, unless you decided to disavow that essay, I don't know. And that's from, I think it's techno-libertarianism to ecofascism. It's it's about a pipeline. And I wanted to come back to this kind of combinatorial idea of political ideology, right, where kind of brands, as you put them, are kind of just recombining in various ways. You get this kind of absurd neo-pagan Jewish neo-pagan Jewish Bolshevism, right? This kind of just insane, ridiculous, kind of it's so silly, kind of plugging together of these of ideologies and trying to make them stick. And I guess there's a part of what that makes that gesture so compelling is that ideologies don't hang together particularly coherently, right? This has been the case for definitely the Republican Party in America for a very long time, trying to attach free market capitalism to religious fundamentalism, but not allowing the religious fundamentalism to actually do anything about the free market, not allowing the free market to do anything about religious fundamentalism, right? So there's kind of this just like a zombie or a hybrid kind of ideology. But I think there is a really important way in which there's a kind of flipping of the core and periphery of ideological ideas. So this is, I think, Michael Frieden's idea. And one thing that happens after Christchurch, and perhaps happening kind of continuously through the alt-right, is a sense that the core of the ideology is being continuously swapped out. So there was a core of ideology that was just like race. And then there's a core of ideology that was just like whatever gets us media attention. And then there's a core of the ideology which kind of shatters after the point where the media attention becomes quite negative. I mean, overwhelmingly negative after Charlottesville. And so there's a sense in which people are trying to kind of reconstitute various kinds of cores to their ideology. And the reason why I think the one way in which I think ecofascism might be a useful term is to describe a fully environment. So to take, might be in the politics that takes protection of nature as its single core and uses that for the justification of all the other kinds of things that far right might want to do anyway. So, for example, you mentioned Pentilinkula, who, you're absolutely right, was pro-autarky, but he was also pro-genocide. And that's quite like an important component of his thinking. And so that's the one way in which I think like ecofascism is probably a really terrifying idea. And even if it doesn't seem particularly kind of compelling now or particularly widespread now, one of the great things about that particular essay, your techno-libertarianism to ecofascism pipeline essay, is that it demonstrates the sheer flexibility with which cores, peripheral ideas and ideologies are simply flipped around, just moved around, have it willy-nilly, just like regardless of any kind of pressure. So you go from techno-libertarianism through the alt-right to ecofascism. And I wonder how you see the dynamics of ideologies changing over time. That's a lot of points, but it's also kind of a very broad question. Sorry, it's probably too much, but yeah.
No, it's great. Yeah, that's the thing. It's about what kind of a frame can you establish to chart the way something changes over time. You could imagine, just to spatialize this, to make it a meme, because that's how my brain works now. You have a left-right political spectrum where you move the slider in one direction or the other. Then you have a political compass, which now gives you an XY axis. And you can have a XYZ axis and expand in a level of complexity, but you also need this measurement of time. Potentially we're mapping something in 4 directions now, and there's just so many variables, it's very confusing. And this is where I think narrative becomes really important, because we have to, spatializing and visualizing these things as data, it just becomes totally nonsensical and incomprehensible. So specifically in that essay, I had in mind a few people that I had watched for a number of years, and maybe I'll just give one example. That there was someone who was deep within anarcho-capitalist and libertarian circles online, and he would post a lot of ANCAP memes, and then he would get into Hans Hermann Hoppe, and he would get into Augusto Pinochet, and you reach this point where if communists make necessary infringements onto the sovereign property rights of other people within the society, then by doing that, they are violating a non-aggression principle, that they're violating your bodily sovereignty by laying a claim to your property or trying to take your property. So the only way to preserve a libertarian order is actually to preemptively violate, this is very silly, to preemptively violate the non-aggression principle by removing the communists from your libertarian utopia. Oh my goodness, look, we've established a state, a monopoly on violence again. So the way I tried to describe it was a system of nested beliefs, that you could begin with this kernel of libertarianism, and then you could put around it like, okay, this political order is correct, and we need to establish some brackets outside of it, which means like a temporary state that will then wither away once you have your perfect libertarian order. But in the meantime, we can throw communists out of helicopters, From that, you have these other beliefs that people hold on to, but are not necessarily part of free market ideology. And you verge into a civic nationalism, something like this. We want to abolish taxes and federal programs. So we're going to do things through the church. It kind of ripples out from there. But over time, you can plot that change from different political coordinates, beginning, anti-state into extremely pro-state. And the person in particular, or one of them that I was thinking about very vividly, that I tried to point at in some of the memes, because I think the people who are familiar with these might be familiar with that person. This is really deep to an audience of like a few thousand at the most. But they went from posting, I'm going to try and say this in a way that doesn't reveal anyone in particular. They went from posting libertarian snake memes to, over the course of probably 3 years, posting, among other things, a man who lives in a bus in the Pacific Northwest, who is a self-described eco-fascist and actually lives off of the land, basically as a kind of like crust punk, like it's a squat in the middle of the woods, essentially, and is like living that ideology that has nothing to do with free markets or libertarianism or liberty or bodily autonomy or sovereign citizens or what. It's like, this is just a fucking Nazi who lives in the woods. And seeing that transformation over 3 years is really, it's a really profound thing, because those two poles have nothing to do with each other. So charting the territory in between is really important, right? If you're trying to forecast and understand how political shifts like this can happen. That being said, and to add a little bit of levity to the conversation, I guess, ideology is really, really complicated and really messy, and that's present everywhere. So it's tempting to like make fun of these, at the beginning, young kids and teenagers who are like buzzing through political theory and like, yeah, I'm a monarcho-socialist or whatever, and they're kind of like making stuff up. Essentially, they're making memes. But ideology from like grown adults in positions of government and like CEOs have totally just nonsense belief systems. I wrote down a few of these. I'm trying to figure out like what is the best, if you had to create an etiology flag for neoliberalism, right? You could describe it as woke diversity mass incarcerationism, rugged individualist oligarchic bailoutism. Like all of that is totally normal and accepted as common sense, but it's like, oxymoronic and on the par of like what Politigram comes up with. So I'm tempted to make the criticism cut the other way as much as possible.
Oh, for sure. I mean, like you said Hoppe, right? Like Hoppe memes and so on, right? The history of really existing libertarian thought is almost exactly the thing you traced through Robke and people like that, right? That they basically started with the free market and they're like, oh, well, how are we going to coordinate people? Okay, well, wouldn't it be really convenient if people were already coordinated? Well, how couldn't people already be coordinated? Well, what if they were all the same race? And you're like, okay, well, then you've like solved the coordination problem by just like making it into a race problem. So you essentially tried to flee fascism at the end of the Second World War, and you've reconstituted something much more like racial far right politics anyway. So yeah, I think that's totally true. I wonder if there's also a kind of a deeper sense in which this is maybe not totally exclusive, but like actually quite particular to America, which is that America, I've always thought as a completely naive and I've never visited the place, so I feel like I'm talking like complete. I'm literally just like watching films and being like, okay, now I know about this place. I'm like reading books, or like talking to Americans. I've never been. So, what is? I've always thought there's kind of a constitutive ambivalence between being a propositional nation, in which there's like fundamentally equality first, and being a nation based on an equality within a single race. Right, this is the constituent of grounding ambivalence of not only America, but perhaps even liberalism to court. Right, like the capacity that people can own property, but also people can be property. Right, and so the dynamics you were describing about the guy who came from libertarianism to being a Nazi living in the woods, I was like, that's so. I just thought every step of the way, I was like, that's really coherent. That maps out almost exactly the same ambivalence. I'm not at all surprised, although I really ought to be. Maybe I'm not surprised because I also spend much of my time watching these people.
I mean, I think there is a danger, isn't it? Like, Josh, you're more enmeshed in it than I am, and I'm pretty enmeshed in this stuff. And I kind of have a question about how we kind of communicate what's going on to people who have like literally no idea about this stuff, who like watch YouTube, normal YouTube, not even weird YouTube. And I had this experience recently of like talking to a friend and just casually talking about or bringing up soy face, and it's something like I say all the time, you're a very soy person, and then having to like explain how estrogen and in the soy makes people go turn into women and makes them queer and all this kind of stuff. And it's like this whole kind of convoluted narrative that it's really hard to explain to someone who has no idea what you're talking about. So I wondered how do you communicate this kind of stuff to, I don't want to use the word normies, but like normies.
No, I know what you mean. Yeah, that's the hazard of it, right? So when you are enmeshed or engrossed in the fringe communities, you begin to lose the ability to speak to the outside world, right? Because what you're talking about is say, for example, in the term of soy, it's about stacking as much meaning as possible into these terms, that you're compressing a lot of different thoughts into these terms that to essentially to save time, right? Because what you're talking about is that in modernization, in industrialized production, in processed foods, there are things that get put into the soup, for lack of a better term, that have adverse effects on the human body or transform the human body. For me, I think those are all issues that the political left should be talking about, right? Those are things that are downstream of the profit motive. I think that's pretty clear, A to B on that one, but some people don't see it that way. They think it's more about, I don't know, esoteric, who knows, the soy is sentient or complete and utter nonsense. But yeah, so the task is, how do you communicate these things to people in a way that is expedient, rather than having to like, okay, let me give you 12 years of internet history before I describe this meme. That's part of the burden. I think it's essentially what we've tried to cultivate in the Discord. I think it's that you have to spend time in all of the different communities, but you also have to talk to just regular people. Like, you have to exist in all of the things. And the problem of being in an internet news filter bubble is that you get only one side of the story. The problem of being in only one political ecosystem is that you only hear one ideology, and then you erect these dogmas that you haven't even really properly thought through. So I guess the answer is, I guess I'm saying be dialectical and like touch grass. Be dialectical and touch grass. That's the advice.
I was wondering about the whether or not there's another way of tracing the kind of these lines of these narratives of changing ideologies. And I've always assumed, and perhaps this is just a foolish assumption, that most people went for the ideology that would give them the most freedom, right? So that's obviously a stupid idea. That's totally naive now I'm saying it out loud, but I've always kind of assumed that the people would change their ideological beliefs based on what they wanted to do anyway. And then they would just like to choose the belief that would ultimately give them the most latitude to do whatever it is they want. Right, which is why you get these kind of contradictions within, for example, the left, right, where you're like, okay, capitalism dominates everything, but whatever you want to do is self-care. And you basically like you can position yourself as kind of having a certain kind of radical identity, but at the same time you can do whatever you want with that radical identity. Maybe that's a totally foolish assumption, but I'm wondering if let's assume it's not a foolish assumption for a moment. What or who is like best placed, do you think, over the next like 4 years of the probably very stultifying Biden presidency? Who is best placed to, across the whole political spectrum, across all the various dimensions we talked about, who is best placed to produce that feeling of like radical disinhibition that for example, the alt-right was so good at?
Right. Oh man, that is the well, you hit the nail on the head. That's yeah, if I had the answer, then our problems would be solved, right? Like that would be, yeah. So let's try and do these one at a time here and try and work my way out. I think, yes, for the freedom and ideology part, mostly. In the beginning, 2015, 16, there's a meme, people often call it flavors of anarchy, which you'll be familiar with it's usually a bunch of like pole balls or like little anarchy flags, and you have anarcho-capitalism, anarcho-primitivism, anarcho-transhumanism, mutualism, agorism, queer anarchism, anarcha-feminism, yada yada, and so on. Basically, all the different colors with their anarchy variant. And this is a choose your own character type of a meme. What Hogwarts character are you? This type of a personality quiz type thing. Tag yourself. It's a tag yourself meme. That being said, it's important that, they all happen to be anarchy. And that shows that generally in the zeitgeist, there's a distrust with centralized authorities, right? It's not like choose your authoritarian meme. It's like choose your anarchy meme. That's what it is. But I think we're at a really specific stage right now, just in the development of American culture, where progressive hegemony has thrown such a wrench into the gears of both the political left and right as they've been traditionally known, or conventionally known, I should say, that people really don't know what to do with it. And I guess we're in the process of figuring that out, because my feeling is that in an era where narratives are deeply in crisis, or like overarching meta narratives are deeply in crisis, people are looking for a type of truth that they can trust. And that's something like following the pleasure principle. Like human pleasure should be something that is part of the political portfolio of the left, right? And traditionally, or conventionally, this is how we would understand it. And so much about right-wing ideology is about just being physically uncomfortable, right? Like that's literally a big part of it. Like I actually don't want things to be easy, because adversity is what allows me to transcend. That's why I lift weights. That's why I retain my semen. That's why I take cold showers. All of this type of thing.
I'm going to be kind of quoting just the admission that you do all those three things. It's that'll be the kind of the sting for the episode.
I actually do quite a bit of it. Yeah. I mean, I haven't worked out in like a year because the pandemic and everything. But yeah. Well, so let me frame it out like this. One of the memes that I've been joking about on the streams and whatever is something called the prude left, which I think is trying to triangulate this problem. That essentially, like especially in the language of self-care, there's something where your own hedonic impulses are utilized against you, that you can be pacified through the consumption of Seamless and Netflix, for example, or just things that give you like a tiny sense of comfort in the short term that delay you from taking more serious action in the long term. Right, you're essentially in an attention economy type of a treadmill of like your feelings or something like that. That managing you or managing culture and managing society's affective qualities is part of how late capitalism is sustaining itself. And this is exactly what is in crisis right now with PMC, the media class, and these pastel carousel things on Instagram. All of this, and so I think if we look in the great historical lens, societies that involve a lot of self-discipline are actually a lot more comfortable than societies that allow a lot of pleasure. And so I'm curious if there is, I don't think that you're going to see a viral explosion of the religious left. That's not what I'm saying. But I think there's something to touch base there, and would maybe inform our politics, because I feel like, I mean, we're drifting here, but it's a larger just issue of like the Enlightenment and liberalism into socialism and all of these things. So I don't know. Essentially, in the prude left meme proposition, what I'm trying to solve for is the issue of woke capitalism that essentially resolves itself as people who live in Brooklyn and work for like elite media companies doing a lot of self-care as everyone else is subject to brutal austerity. Like, I think that is the end result of a program of self-care. So maybe if those people had a little bit more self-discipline, they wouldn't be making as much unpaid propaganda as they are now. That's kind of it. I feel a lot
that's great. That's great. I mean, I've never liked having fun either.
I'm totally in favor of disciplining the PMC class. They should be disciplined in multitude of ways. Yeah. I was actually listening to your stream from Monday, the one you got going through this giant iceberg of ideologies, starting from like the normal ones at the top and working all the way down. It was really good, and I was quite ashamed about how many I just knew off the top of my head. It says a lot about me, basically. I wondered, what is the point of that exercise? Because you were kind of like going over basically all of them and drawing out different things and looking them up on Wikipedia and stuff. Why should we be knowing about Passadism or whatever else tiny once 20 years ago was a thing? Why is that like a thing that you thought was worthwhile doing?
Yeah, it's funny. There's when you tour these political spaces that are fringe and silly and mimetic, you often come across stuff that sounds totally made up and ridiculous. But one of the things that is interesting, maybe this is the top layer, or of this building up this scaffolding, this is the most complex layer of it, is that the internet is allowing this nichification of culture, which is now playing out politically, and young people are, A/B combinatory pairing different identities to come up with monarcho syndicalism as one example. Is my favorite example for it. So I'll just use that one. Monarcho syndicalism, which is definitely something that was made up by a 14-year-old pairing together emojis, right? But when you search these terms, because all of the world's information has been digitized in some way, you then start to unearth these really little known, totally bizarre histories of political movements in the past that are actually real. So if you're trying to do some type of a forecasting, I think it behooves the research to just be familiar with all of those extremities is the easy version of it. Maybe the more scholarly, difficult version of it is that we have on the not too distant horizon some type of a terminal point for the political economy that has thus far organized the world and global society. And implicitly, these memers know that they're on the receiving end of like planetary extinction. Sorry to be dramatic about it, but in some cases, things are going to get dark very, very quickly in the next century if things don't shift course in some way. And so you're seeing, I think, a frantic buzzing through history and theory and looking through brute forcing these combinations and different types of political ideologies, that they could problem solve a way of organizing society that was scalable for the crisis of the next century that's unfolding. And whether that is having a monarch and a guild system, probably not. But as we looked at before, like our current neoliberal ideology is totally self-contradictory and riddled with inconsistencies. So, maybe they're not too far off the base, right? I guess this is essentially the proposition of science fiction, right? That's what we're talking about. It's like a way of envisioning or prototyping the future, but instead of doing it through memes and novels, instead of doing it through novels, they're doing it through memes.
The collapse thing is completely fascinating, and the kind of climate collapse. And it's also fascinating in terms of the discussion of pleasure that you were giving us before, right? So how do you see pleasure or disinhibition as working through collapse? Or is collapse just a kind of a pleasurable masochism? I've often found that whenever I declare the apocalypse is nigh, that I get a certain thrill, a certain rush, and it imbues me with a certain very momentary charismatic power over people around me. And then within like 5 minutes, they're like, this is actually kind of cringe. I don't want to believe that the apocalypse is coming, and I don't think it really is. So I'm wondering like how, and when you're 14, you don't have that reflex, right? When you're 14, you're not like, okay, well, people have been predicting the end of the world since the beginning of the world. So, it doesn't bother me. But I'm wondering like, how does how does discipline or disciplining other people or disciplining yourself or taking pleasure in disciplining yourself work out in what seems to me like a huge explosion of collapse, nihilism, climate change doom, this kind of thing at the moment?
Yeah. I think there's I'm trying to remember the name of the group. I think they were artists more so than they were activists, but it was a few years ago. Maybe it was in the 90s even. I don't remember. But they had this project called Fuck for the Forest, which was that it was a bunch of like activists who would basically make pornos of their the people in their commune, and then they would sell the porn videos as a fundraiser for environmental I don't know, regulation or lobbying or something like that. It kind of seems like, oh, the world's going to end. Let's just have an orgy. Like that's the implicit, like, there's no way you're going to raise, what do you need? Like $70 trillion to like solve carbon in the atmosphere. It's like, you guys are just fucking, that's what's happening here. Yeah. So maybe that's the furthest extreme of that. Yeah, I'm trying to think of, I guess my feeling is like there's a small group of people that perform this role of basically doing underpaid work, propagandizing on behalf of capitalist culture. And those people would really benefit from having social democracy in the US context. So I'm talking about I gave this example on a recent podcast, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but I literally know people who wrote think pieces like Bernie Sanders is anti-Semitic and he hates women, and they got paid $150. And I know that those people don't have healthcare. So just the idea that like that thing exists, like that's the thing that needs to be solved. And I feel like maybe a little bit of self-discipline on behalf of those people, if they were less incentivized or on the treadmill of like getting likes and retweets and being celebrated on social media, and had the long vision of like, okay, I'm getting paid $150 now to write this think piece, but I'm going to have $10,000 in medical debt later. It's in my own self-interest to not write the think piece. Maybe that's just the discipline that it needs, because at that point you're really just looking at ideology, right? It's the ideology of a very small segment of the population. It's mostly geographically located. It's mostly people within a certain age brackets who went to elite universities and are now falling out of the elites. If you can shift the worldview of those people, it would have some cascading influences. I think artists are well positioned to do that. So I've targeted those people as, I also personally dislike them. I like, as individuals, a lot of them I personally don't like. So I'm making fun of them on the internet is my way of coping with it, because things are very expensive here. So I've kind of drifted from the conversation a little bit. Maybe you can reframe it and we can talk about environmentalism again.
No. So I think that's correct. I mean, like the maybe personal antipathy, personal hatred is the central variable missing from my general theory of posting. What was your most when you were younger? I'm assuming you were also like interested in politics from quite an early age. What was the maybe I'll volunteer mine first. What was the most cringe political position you ever adopted? So I think my most cringe political position was that I was very into the coming insurrection for like a while. I know I don't have the voice of someone who's into the coming insurrection, but I was. Maybe I do. Maybe I have exactly the voice of someone who's into the coming insurrection. No, I absolutely do, don't I? Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
What age was that?
17, I think. I think it did. Yeah, it was. Yeah, I didn't get much more cringe than that. I think I was very into Plato at one point. No, Aristotle, sorry. I was very into Aristotle against Plato when I was like 14. And then I kind of took a hard turn for the far left, much more kind of insurrectionary, much less Aristotelian, very into kind of, the 4 different kinds of causes that Aristotle identifies. I was like, he's correct. Also, his politics are all correct. And then, eventually, coming insurrection. And now I'm a liberal, obviously.
Definitely. I was a massive Richard Dawkins fan. I fucking love that guy.
Oh my God, so was I. And I forgot.
I watched all his YouTube videos.
I've suppressed it.
I was well into the God Delusion. I read it about 3 times. It's, I actually reread it a couple of years ago just to see what it was like. And I was just like completely horrified that me as a 14-year-old was reading this material, because it was just so stupid and like racist and like very awful stuff. And that's my thing. And I suppose I was set on that new atheist kind of trajectory that could have very much ended up in the alt-right somewhere, or in some kind of fascist sect of whatever section of the internet somewhere. And it's really interesting, kind of disconcerting thing to think about now.
I've got an even more disconcerting one, which is that, and people who've signed up to our Patreon already know this because I wrote an essay about it, which is that it's very closely related to the new atheist stuff. There was a guy I was really into The Amazing Atheist. I don't know if you guys remember him. Very annoying in retrospect. But at the time I was like, yeah, fuck Christians. Although I didn't know any Christians because the UK is very secular. So I didn't actually, I think I knew there was one Christian girl in my class, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to use these arguments. Yeah. I'm going to use these arguments against this girl. Anyway, and that kind of led onto what I think was I'm guessing that was like a kind of someone who was like in the early EDL. The EDL was a street movement in the UK, was like anti-Muslim. And he was getting me to sign. He was getting people who had this petition on like parliament.gov or whatever the website is, which is the UK Parliament's website where you can sign petitions to send to the government. And it was like ban or shut down the Sharia law courts that exist in the UK. Now this was a total far-right fantasy. But when I was 14 and on the same track that Alex was, this new atheist kind of this track where I was really into secularism, I was really into this kind of thing. I think I either gave a fake name and signed a petition to ban Sharia law in the UK, which is my only far-right activism, as far as I'm aware. Or I didn't sign it because I was like, I'm a kind of law-abiding citizen and I'm not of age yet, so I can't sign this petition. But I think, maybe I've completely obscured the coming insurrection as like this ultimate cringe moment, but actually maybe I have a much more cringe and actually much more disturbing on it. And obviously the same thing about the narrative that Alex was saying applies to me as well. It's totally possible that I would have been led astray in that way. But
it's funny how these things they're curiously next to each other, where it's when you're talking to someone who has beliefs that are on the borders of the Overton window, it's much more likely that they had other beliefs at another period of time that are also, towards the edge or beyond the Overton window, right? It's like once you make the rupture, you can kind of ping pong around to a number of different places, right? Once you've uncorked maybe it's like a Pandora's box of ideas or something like that. You've unseated the necessary assumptions that like liberal democracy is the best system, and you're willing to entertain a whole bunch of other things.
I mean, I actually, the kind of strange thing about my position on that when I was signing the petition is that I was doing it in favor of liberal democracy, right? So I was still kind of aiming at the core of the present. But the core of the present, like I was saying about America, is constituted by two very different cores. At that particular moment in British history, it was constituted by, on the one hand, New Labour and a very kind of like happy clappy kind of like Methodist kind of vibe, but also with this kind of vaguely kind of fuck over the unions kind of thing. But also it was constituted by intense Islamophobia and the rise of the British security state, which of course has been around for 400 years. But yeah, I totally agree about this kind of thing. I think Vitalik Buterin, who is the inventor of Ethereum, he described this as convex and concave political structures. But I guess a more prominent promulgator of it is JREG on YouTube.
Yeah.
That point you made about the kind of the rupture thing is really interesting. There was a subreddit that's now been banned in the various ban waves that happened called Debate Fascism. And they would be the people that was set up by fascists, and they would debate like Mussolini or Mosley or whatever. And they would have these like Ask Me Anythings where someone would come on and say, I'm an anarchist, debate me. Or I'm a socialist, debate me. I'm a authoritarian nationalist, whatever, debate me. And it was all these very extreme or outside the mainstream kind of things going on. And they were all kind of having a very genial conversation about it. I mean, there wasn't like I'm an anti-fascist, debate me, but I could see that. I could even see that happening. There was a kind of this flattening of like any kind of conflict, and we would just like pose these positions against each other and have this kind of conversation. And I think that would not be possible. That would not have happened. I'm a centrist liberal debate me. I don't think that would have happened in the thing.
Right. Yeah, I think of this as the sandbox problem. Yeah. So, right, that is totally unique to Reddit. That wouldn't happen if you were on the street corner or something like that. Like, that doesn't happen in the public square. It happens on the internet square. It's a question of scale as well. But I think to relate this back to the earlier question of like, I wasn't so much interested in politics when I was in high school. I mean, I was interested a bit, but I was more so interested in games. And I think what games did by accident was create a similar type of a sandbox to what you're describing as on Reddit. So one of my fondest memories from the internet is a game called Cyber Nations, where there were these meta guilds that were from message board communities, and they formed alliances in the game. This is actually, it's a really good microcosm for this stuff now, actually. And so Cyber Nations is a browser-based game where you log in, you make an account, and then you get your country and you have resources, and you pick a system of government, you pick the tax rate, you pick if you want to build infrastructure or parks and leisure, or you want to build factories or whatever, kind of like it's like a Sim City, but it's not in a map. It's just in an Excel spreadsheet, because the real game takes place on the message boards. And so you had your political economy that you would manage through this Excel spreadsheet. And then you would debate people in the comments, and you would get into beefs, and then these would turn into wars in the world. And it was factionalized in such a way that because there was no formal system of organizing people in the game, you would get the people from B on 4chan, and you would get the goons. I was part of the Something Awful group because I had friends who were real life friends from high school who were very active on Something Awful. So we were in their group. And there were ambassadors between the various guild or the various alliances. And so the game was about participating on the forums, with the stakes being that your country could get blown up at any time. But what was really interesting about it is that because we had this think tank of people who were like, just like autistic nerds min-maxing a spreadsheet, we discovered that you could spend a week not collecting taxes. You could put your whole country on like the precipice of bankruptcy. And right before you cross over into bankruptcy, where your country would fall apart, you could swap from like a total political spectrum swap. So you'd have no taxes, no work, total amount of leisure and happiness. And then you could institute fascism and put everyone to work for a week, and then collect just boatloads, just huge amounts of profit. Mm-hmm. And we would time it so that the whole alliance would do an ideology switch and maximize productivity on like a weekly basis. And it was, we were flourishing. We were like one of the best, one of the strongest alliances. And then as what happens with forum communities is just after a while, people get bored, and like our second in command decided to quit the game by nuking the first in command without any warning. And then the whole alliance fell apart shortly after that. So it's kind of a beautiful just microcosm of the way that online spaces allow you to play with ideology and accidentally discover stuff rather than formalizing it. And I think that's analogous also to, you could extrapolate this out to guilds in World of Warcraft and different ways of how do gamers solve the question of distributing scarce resources. All of those are political things, but we're not explicitly political when you start up the game.
Just trying to kind of wrap this all up into like a single kind of neat object. So I mentioned earlier that I think the kind of the central struggle of the left, at least in some sense, is like to struggle against the becoming meta-politics of politics, like to struggle against this kind of cultural politics. And not to get kind of like all Adorno, but what is the meme that most fully struggles against its own status as being a meme? Right? Like what is the meme that is most antagonistic to the subsumption of life into the meme format?
It's a complicated question. It's not an easy one.
Okay, some clarity. Adorno's idea of art is that art is necessarily a commodity under capital, right? But like the art can register its own status as a commodity under capital, and it can resist that status as a commodity in various ways, right? By being kind of in various ways like non-fungible and so on. And he has a very kind of nuanced complicated formal argument about the autonomy of art and so on in bourgeois society, blah, blah, blah. But like, I'm just kind of wondering, like, is there a way in which the form itself, the meme format itself, can ultimately like get beyond its just kind of circulation in a certain sphere without simply doing the really obvious thing, right? Which is what the far right were really good at doing. So there were a whole bunch of memes that led to the Christchurch shooting. Now that's a way of getting out of the circulatory economy of memes. Something really happened and people died, like loads of people died, and it was appalling, right? Like you don't want that to be the way in which you exit the kind of circulation of memes. So is there a way of like generating a meme such that we kind of terminate this like kind of endless kind of spinning in place inside the meme economy?
I see. Okay.
You mentioned fungible, and I just immediately thought of NFTs, and that's obviously not what you're talking about at all.
I made the same association. Yeah. The Adorno NFT. Yeah. I mean, I think when I hear the word meme now, I don't think about 600 pixel JPEGs, right? So if you're talking about a memeplex or a subculture that posts a lot of small images with text on them, and then getting out into the real world as a way of breaking the meme ecosystem or what have you. That's one way to look at it. But I think memes are just a digital version of ideology. They're frames through which you can view the world. So for me, I mean, I think they're very effective because there's these little provocations of like, how do you view this issue? And then they just incrementally nudge you over time, shape your way of viewing the world. So I don't think you can really move past frames. If you're talking about moving past ideology, then I think you're talking about having a fully robust understanding of the world, which is like the reason we have ideology is because the world is so complicated and we need to compress it down. Like it is this act of making narratives that cut through the signal to noise mess that you get when you're looking at too much information. So not having an ideological frame sounds like the end of history. I don't know. It sounds like you've actually solved the problem of ideology and you're just actually in the world. So I don't know how to get there. If I had the answer, then I'd write that down. I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, taking it back to this thing of medical debt and all the other stuff, that it all boils down to medical debt. I think I don't know the answer to this question either, but I would say that a meme or some kind of frame that kind of provokes action to solve these kind of very concrete things is somehow breaking out of this kind of political kind of trap that we're all kind of trapped in.
Totally. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah,
I mean, definitely my framing it as a kind of question rooted via Adorno is not the way of making it like instantly solvable or making it kind of useful at all to any kind of leftist strategy. Thank you very much for coming and talking to us.
It's great to chat.
Plug the thing, whatever you want to plug. You've got a new piece in The Guardian, which I haven't actually read yet, but
it's circulating around there. Yeah, it's you can check out that in the Guardian from what was it, a few days ago now. Yeah, I think probably the best place is to check out the podcast that I do monthly. I also Twitch stream. I'm sprinkled throughout all of the different things because I think the greater project is just this immersive research project that takes the form of Twitch streams, of articles, of podcasts, of memes, of a Discord community. It's like all of the stuff. So yeah, but it's all under my name. You can find me on any of the given platforms, and yeah, maybe join us for the second half of the ideology iceberg. And it's starting to get really weird that we're halfway through it. It's starting to get very weird.
Thanks a lot for listening. If you enjoyed that, then you can help support the podcast on Patreon. All the support we get means a lot to us, and it really does help us grow this project. So that's patreon.com/12rulesforwhat, and you can sign up for as little as $2 a month. Thanks a lot, and I will see you very soon.
Hello, and welcome to We Will Remember Freedom, a monthly podcast of anarchist fiction. I'm your host, Margaret Killjoy. Hello, and welcome to Live Like the World is Dying, your podcast for what feels like the end times. I'm your host, Margaret Killjoy. Hello, and welcome to the jingle for both of my podcasts. I'm your host, Margaret Killjoy. You can find my podcasts wherever you get your podcasts or get them from the Channel Zero Network.
Love rules.